So I'm sitting here kind of reviewing what my pastor preached on yesterday at church, and it really sort of hits home for some of the things that I've gone through in my life. He was talking about Joseph and just continuing in the series on faith and the unknown and being able to embrace the unknown and walking into those places that God's called you to, not knowing what the outcome's going to be. And I think about like some of the circumstances that I found myself in life, and some of the things that I've walked through, not because I had brothers who sold me into slavery like Joseph did or anything like that, but just because of random circumstances, like, ending up with a brain tumor, or being losing so many children to miscarriage and things like that. And how, while as painful as those things were and still are, how he has allowed me to speak to others from circumstances that if I'd not gone through that, I never would have had that opportunity. I think about after I had the first brain surgery, about a week later, I got up and one of my legs didn't work for whatever reason. And so I got out of bed and just kind of fell over. So crawled to the kitchen, fixed some breakfast, while, pulling myself up to the counter and just going back down to the floor and scooting around with the one leg I could get to work. And eventually ended up having to go to the emergency room at Duke where they'd done the surgery after I talked to my neurosurgeon. And they never determined why I lost the use of that leg for the day. But while I was there was, I had to share a room with another person, and they were very loud. It was a young woman, and she had a migraine headache, and she screamed the entire time that we were in there. And of course, I'm still in pain. I'd just had, my head cut open a week before, and I'd not been allowed to take any medicine while I was in the emergency room, and wasn't allowed to eat, wasn't allowed to drink in case I had to be taken in for emergency surgery. But while I was there and this woman was screaming and screaming and screaming, we pulled back the curtain between our beds, and I was able to just kind of share Jesus with her. And I mean, it was a bizarre situation. She told me about having a drug problem and having family situations that were not the best, and all of her children had been taken away from her, and she was younger than I was, and at the time I was 24. And so just having that opportunity is something that I never would have had. And I still pray for that girl sometimes whenever God brings her to mind, and pray that she knows that she's come to know the Lord and come to know Him in a real way, and that her life has turned around, and hopefully she's gotten custody of her children. But another thing was when I was able to go to work at the Pregnancy Care Center after I lost 4 babies to miscarriage. I was able to, as painful and as terrible as that was, that allowed me to have more compassion for the women who had walked through abortions and were living with that shame and that regret. And I can't say that, yay, I have 4 babies in heaven, and that's a wonderful thing, because it's still a painful thing for me. However, to know that God allows me to walk with others through that same situation, and to feel the same kind of pain that some of these people have experienced. I know that He's placed me in specific places to be able to minister to people for that. But as I was kind of looking through notes from the last few weeks of sermons, one verse stuck out to me, because it's something that it's one of the first verses I teach my kids, and that's it's 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7, and it says, for God did not give us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And when I read that, and I came to this realization probably just a year or so ago, that when it says that God didn't give us a spirit of fear, it means a literal spirit. It's not a feeling, it's not the emotion, it's not something that we just feel. It's an actual spirit. It just like, you have in the Bible, it talks about we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and the powers of the air and all these things. And all those things are real things. The principalities and the powers of the air and all that kind of stuff. It's real stuff. It's a real spiritual thing. And so I believe in that verse when it was written. I don't think that Paul was saying to Timothy, just for God didn't give you fear to feel. I think he was literally saying that the spirit that he gave you is one that is strong and powerful and gives you a sound mind. And it's not something that will ever make you afraid. In fact, it's the opposite of fear. God's love casts out all fear. And so it can't coexist. But I think a lot of times our lack of faith leads to that place of fear. And we tend to get comfortable in the fear. I know some of the sermons that our pastors preached are talking about leaving the familiar and getting away from the comfortable places. And I think the fear of doing that is actually sort of this kind of comfortable thing that we put on. And I know a lot of people are thinking that's weird. No, I don't put on fear intentionally, and I don't think of it like that. But if God gave us a spirit of power and of love and of a sound mind, then how can we not use that power to slay that fear? How do we not allow ourselves to walk in freedom from fear if we have that spirit inside of us that God says he gives to us? And I'm saying that to myself. That's something that I constantly struggle with. Insecurities and doubts, they're fears, and they're just like any other fears. And I think about how often I limit what God wants me to do. I am not obedient because of my my own perceptions and my own ideas and my own fears and my own doubts. And so I just want to encourage you to kind of dwell on that and ask God to show you, what are the things in my life that I am allowing to be a stronghold. I think that God absolutely gives us the power to walk away from those vices and those strongholds and those things. And a lot of times it's just something that we've become so comfortable in that it's like we like to stay chained up. We like to stay wrapped up in this thing. We like to be held back because it's where we've always been. It's what we know. It's like Stockholm Syndrome, when people have been kidnapped or have been abused, they tend to stay with that person because in their mind they kind of connect to that. It's comfortable. At least they know that as long as they do this won't happen. And they kind of get this twisted idea that their captor really does care for them. But it's not like that. Those fears are holding you back from a life of freedom and from a life of walking into that place of unknown. And you don't have to be afraid because he's never going to take you somewhere and just leave you there. God's with you whether you want to recognize his presence or not. And when we're walking through those painful places where he can really push us into a new place in our lives, maybe for the first time, then a lot of times I think that we get fearful, and we miss out on the opportunities that we have to minister to others in that same place, and we fail to recognize that God is there with us. He never leaves us. He never forsakes us. That's what his word says. And if we don't hold on to that, then we're holding on to those same chains that have held us back for so long. So I feel like I kind of am all over the place with this, but I know God's working in my heart to kind of show me places that I have fears, insecurities, and doubts, and he's showing me places where I have not actually believed what I said I did, and I think that's where we have to go. My prayer is like, show me where I say I believe, but I don't really. Show me where my faith is the weakest so that you can grow it, so that you can help me in my unbelief, as the verse says. So just wanted to share that really quick tonight. I hope you guys had a great Monday, and I'll catch up with you later this week.